Hey y'all, it's Tristan. We're outside today, thankfully. Hopefully this will be the first of many more videos outside. I'm always up for being outside. In fact, I'd rather be outside most of the time than being inside. And today it's a little bit overcast. Hopefully that'll make sure that the video actually doesn't have too many glares or anything, but it's nice to be outside today. Weather's a little bit more conducive for filming. And we're going to talk a little bit about seed pods today. So, seed pods on your orchids. What are they? How do you know what it is? Um, how did it get there? What do I do with it? And a little bit into, breeding too. So, for a little more intermediate uh, growers who've been growing for a little bit longer. So, what is a seed pod? Orchids are flowering plants. In fact, they're the largest family of flowering plants. And just like all other flowering plants, they flower, and the purpose of the flower is for reproduction. We love the flowers. That's why we grow them, because they're beautiful. But that's not why the plant is growing it. The plant is trying to attract a pollinator. And the purpose of that is to have the flower pollinated, of course, um, to create the next generation via seed pod. Orchids are spread via seed, and unlike other plants, in the flowering family, orchids have teeny tiny little seeds with just an embryo, uh, no endosperm, so there's nothing there for the growing embryo to survive off of. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in another video. But yeah, so you'll get seed pods on your orchid sometimes by accident that you didn't know about. In this case, I made these seed pods myself. Well, what do you do if you see a seed pod on your orchid? So the first thing you should think of when you see a pod developing on your plant is, do I want this pod here? Um, and usually the answer is going to be no. So let's say you had a phalaenopsis or just a random cattleya or dendrobium, and you see a seed pod. Uh, that's usually either going to occur from one of two things. You either get sometimes a random or a spontaneous self-pollination event, which doesn't normally occur because that's inbreeding. Or the other thing that happens a lot of time, we have insects outside. Moths, bees, bumblebees, honeybees, orchid bees. Here in South Florida, we have a native sweat bee that pollinates some of the native orchids. And if you grow outside, there's a good chance your orchids are going to get pollinated if they're attracted to those flowers. So if you don't know what the seed pod, the provenance of the seed pod is, the best course of action is usually just to cut it off. There may be a reason why you don't want to do that. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you don't know what the seed pod was made from, if the insects did it, there's a good chance it's either a self-pollination event, which is okay, or there's also the chance that maybe the plant visited another flower, another orchid that's closely related in your garden or in your growing area. And if that's the case, you may have a seed pod that you don't know what it is. Could be some unknown hybrid. It may not even be a good seed pod. Oftentimes you'll see seed pods that open up, or excuse me, they don't go to term and then they abort, they turn brown and squishy and they fall off. And that's usually because the whatever happened, the pollination event, that's usually because it created infertile embryos. But let's say that you do want the seed pods. Why would you want the seed pods? So orchids, unlike other plants we talked about, have no endosperm. And so their seeds are teeny tiny, and sometimes they number in the thousands to close to 1,000,000 seeds in a capsule. And they are dust-like. They are teeny tiny. You can barely see them with your naked eye. Some of them have a little bit larger seeds, like vanilla, but the majority of orchids have teeny tiny dust-like seed. And those seeds in the wild float on the wind as the capsule opens, and they're dispersed. Epiphytes in general will be dispersed into areas on other tree branches or somewhere that there happens to be some sort of mycorrhizal fungus that they associate with, that the fungus um, supplies nutrients to the growing embryo. So the orchid seed needs the fungus, the mycorrhizal associate, to germinate and to grow during the first stages of its life. And that's why it's really hard to grow orchid seeds. So if you are not experienced and you're not willing to undertake the process um, that you need to grow orchids from seed, it's best sometimes to just cut them off, because you usually have to do it in a laboratory with agar in a specialized nutrient formula of agar or some other type of medium in sterilized containers. And if you go check out the plant propagator, he's got a whole YouTube channel dedicated to that. He does that for a living and a hobby now, and he's got some great videos on that if you want to learn some more. So if you're planning to breed with it like I am, maybe you want to keep it, send it off to a lab, or sow it yourself, or do something like that with it. But otherwise, it's usually best to just cut it off because it takes away energy from the plant. I know a lot of people who just leave their pods on, and sometimes I do, because if you're blessed to live somewhere in Florida where we have palm trees or environment that's conducive for orchids to grow, we oftentimes will have some of those mycorrhizal fungi present in our environment. On this palm tree here to the right of me that you probably can't see, there are some volunteers growing on there. And behind you, we have some palms here where the native tampensis will start to grow, and other orchids will also volunteer, or we call them natural recruits. So occasionally I like to experiment by leaving some of these insect pollinated pods on there, letting them go to term if they're viable. And sometimes I'll sprinkle the seed, just on the trees around here just to see if anything pops up. And believe it or not, quite a lot pops up. It may not be always what the type of plants you want to grow, but if you experiment, you will find certain orchids will germinate on these trees if like I said, you live somewhere like here in Florida where we already have native epiphytic orchids and the environment is conducive for them to grow. But here you can see, I don't know if you can see that in the shot. So this is my tag with my notation. This just tells me what it was I did and when I did it. So this is Guarianthe beringiana behind me that I've been holding on to this whole time. It used to be known as Cattleya beringiana, but it's in its own genus now with a few other species. But it's a Cattleya relative. They get massive. They bloom once a year, unfortunately. It's always in the fall, and they create these huge clusters of lavender flowers. Sometimes they come in a cerulean or alba form, but this is the typical just pink form. And I wanted to make a new outcrossing. I don't see beringiana offered for sale a lot of times, and I think it would be cool to make some new baby seedlings of beringiana. So this tag tells me this is an outcrossing. So a friend of mine donated some pollen, and I used his pollen from a different genetic individual to pollinate this individual, October 16th, 2023, and I have on here ×3. That's just my notation so that I know that these 3 pods here are all the same event. They're all from the same pollen, or they're all pollinated with the same pollen, I should say. So there's sometimes, you have pollen from different sources and you want to do seed pods from different individuals on the same, then you need to indicate which pod goes to which pollen so you don't lose your provenance. But that's just a little bit about orchid seeds. Oftentimes the pods can take, anywhere 6 months to a year. And if you're not in for the long haul, there's no point in doing it. 6 months to a year, that's a long time to wait for seed pods. And then oftentimes if you're going to send these seeds to a lab, those are going to need to be sown in an agar, like I said, a sterile environment on a nutrient agar specifically formulated for orchids. They got to go through multiple replates, and you're usually looking at a year plus. So I've had this plant for a few years, and it always blooms in the fall in October, and that's when I pollinated it. I tried, you want to make sure that you have real fresh flowers to do this with. You don't want to wait until the flowers are old, especially on species like this that don't last very long. These flowers only last for like a week, unfortunately. But October 16th is when I pollinated this plant, and so what I'm going to keep a lookout for is I'm going to wait for these pods to, make it at least 6 months, usually. And they'll start to show the signs that they're ready for harvest. A lot of people like to do green pod culture, which I do not like to do. I like to collect dry seed. But the seeds pods will start to turn yellow, and they'll start to twist just a little bit. And eventually there'll be a crack forming along this seam here. There's 3 seams on each pod, and they'll start to crack just slightly, and it's just a waiting game, and you have to catch the pod at just the right time, Because one day you'll have a green pod, and sometimes you'll go out the next day and you'll have a pod that's yellow, it's split open on all three sides, and your seed is gone to the wind. So you have to be really vigilant on knowing when your pods are going to be ready. And I've made many mistakes in the past where I pollinated an orchid and waited on a seed pod, and I went a week without checking it, and the seed is blown away into the wind, gone forever. And it's a lot of time to spend and energy from the plant if you're not ready for it. So if you have plants at home and you see an insect pollinated pod, it takes a lot of energy from the plant. So if you have a small plant, you may just want to go ahead and break it off. But we'll change locations here in a second, and I'll show you. If you leave some of your pods on and you sprinkle them around, like I say, you might end up getting lucky and end up with some little natural recruits, and we can show you that now. Okay, and we're back. So here we talked about if you leave your seed pods on. Let's say you're happy with leaving them on and it taking away from the plant a little bit, and you want to sprinkle your seeds around on your trees in hopes of getting baby orchids to grow. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to result in anything, but just for kicks and giggles, sometimes we like to do it. As you can see here on this pygmy date palm here, I have a lot of our native orchids, the Encyclia tampensis. In this clump, there's multiple individuals here. It's doing fantastic. And being native, this plant will often go to seed. And down here on the bottom, I'll show you in a second, there are some baby tampensis growing. But since I know that there is some mycorrhizal fungus already present on this plant that aids in germination and growth of orchids, I figured this would be a great host tree to just sprinkle some seed pods that the bugs did, just to see if anything would grow. And sure enough, right here, you can see in the frame, this is a baby grammatophyllum. I have some big grammatophyllums out there that I usually let go to seed. The bugs will pollinate it. And this one, it grew in here. And this plant is only about 2 years old. There's also a Prosthecia in here that I put in here myself, but this little guy here, that's a natural orchid. It hasn't bloomed yet, of course, because this plant has to become massive to bloom usually. All right, and I want to just show y'all guys some of these little orchids growing here. So not everything are volunteers. Some of these are, like I said, the Tempensis was put here. But this guy here, this is a grammatophyllum. I can tell just by the way it looks. I've seen a lot of grammatophyllums, and I'm 100% sure that's a grammatophyllum. But when it first came out, I didn't know what it was, and half the time that's pretty fun, just waiting to see what it's going to be. Here you can see a little baby Encyclia tampensis is what I'm assuming it is, because this is a tampensis down here. It more than likely had a seed pod. The seed fell into here, and you got a little baby one growing. So we can come around the tree. This is a little orchid baby growing in there, where you see my finger, but I don't know what that is. It might be a grammatophyllum, but I also have some other things that have thin leaves like that. So it'll be interesting to find out what that is. Here you can see there's another little baby Encyclia tampensis. And let's come down here. You will notice I think I have some scale on these encyclias that I've treated, but you'll still see it in the shot. But up in here are some more baby encyclias, and I'm not entirely positive that they're all going to be tampensis, because I have other encyclias on here that are not tampensis, and who's to know what pollination event happened with the bugs. There could have been some outcrossing. The bugs could have been moving some pollen from one plant to the other. So it'll be interesting to see what some of these little babies turn out to be if they survive. But there you go. Again, little baby orchids just growing in there. This is a grammatophyllum. Some of this other stuff I put in here. There, in the center of the frame, that is what I'm assuming is another Encyclia tampensis. All right, guys, I wanted to just show off my my stump here real quick. So this is a stump from one of our oak trees that fell during Hurricane Ian. It was a really nice oak tree, and so I thought I'd keep, this little Y shape of the tree here, just as an orchid mount. Oak does not normally make very good mounting material because after the tree's dead, it usually breaks down too fast to be worth it in the long run. But I thought this piece here was just too nice to give up on it, and it was sentimental because it was the tree in our yard. So I went ahead and put some orchids on there anyways. And right now, you know, Hurricane Ian was, oh man, that must have been already over a year ago. I don't know if it's been 2 years yet, but I've got some Tempensis. This was already on the tree when the tree fell. This Dendrobium was not. This is a Nina Icer. This is Norma Jackson by Discolor. As you can see, it is a prolific bloomer, especially when they get to be taller plants and in full sun. They'll turn dark magenta like this. So that's doing really well. Here, if you can see, this is a Oncidium Sweet Sugar, or just one of those yellow dancing lady Oncidiums that everybody calls Sweet Sugar. That was here when the tree was still standing, and I left it there. Here is a Semi-Terete Vanda. This one is Freddie Bowie, I believe it's called. I might have a photo I can insert of that. But here is something cool. So I had some Encelia Africana seed pods, or seed I should say, in my fridge that had been sitting for like over a year, and I decided it was time to throw them out or do something with them. And so I said, what the heck, let's sprinkle them around the yard. Let's see if they grow, because I know I've seen Encelia grow at Palmer's where I work at the nursery, and sure enough, look at that, guys, little baby Encelias. Some of y'all might be asking, how do I know those are actually Encelias? Because we've grown Encelia from seed, and I've seen a lot of the Encelia volunteers at work, and I know when you see little seedlings come straight out of nothing, and they've got this real strong venation in this cross hatching, that's usually Encelias. At least it is for us, because we have so many growing everywhere. But I thought that was really cool. So up here I've got a clump of Resurrection Fern in the native Encyclia Tempensis. Like I said, that was already there when the tree was standing. This Dendrobium was not, and neither was this Vanda. But I thought that was pretty cool. Who knows if they'll actually live to see adulthood or bloom, but it's interesting nonetheless. So I just wanted to show you all that. Sweet Sugar already fading, but this plant blooms all the time, and I was worried that I was going to lose this plant because this is an extreme high light scenario where I have this sitting in my yard. So the sun comes up over here, goes across the sky, goes behind the woods there. So that means that this plant on this stump here is getting some direct sun for a good 6 hours, maybe 4 to 6 hours. And you can tell these antelope dendrobiums, they don't mind it one bit. They love it. Tempensis thought that was going to burn. In fact, it really did. It burned the crap out of it. A lot of it has come back though, and you can see the stuff that comes back acclimated to the sun doing just fine. A little reddish, but that's anthracene and that's their sunblock. And the Sweet Sugar seems to be happy. Doesn't seem to have too much of a problem with it, albeit it does have a little bit of shade. Sorry about the wind. Hope that doesn't come across too terrible on video. I'm sure it will. But it doesn't seem to be too bothered by the highlight situation it's sitting in right here. It also gets a lot of water and fertilizer, and it gets a little bit of shade from this guy. I thought I'd just throw that in there. Alright guys, we are back. Here is another pygmy date palm that's in my front yard. I've got a lot of orchids on it. I wanted to show y'all something pretty cool. So here you can see I've got an encyclia that I put there. And this is how I found out that these trees would host other things besides the natives. I'm gonna get a shot from down below, but what you see in the center of the shot here is a volunteer grammatophyllum. I didn't put that seed there. That seed just happened to make its way there, undoubtedly from the big plants that I have in my yard that went to seed. But that's been growing for now probably about 2.5 years. That's about how long ago I noticed it coming out. That plant is massive now, and it has survived our cold winters 2 years in a row now, going into the third winter. no problems. And as you can see, I've got other plants on this tree that I put there. And excuse the wind noise, it's kind of windy today. We're gonna hop up here ever so carefully without falling. And this is a new experiment that I did. I had some extra Certipodium punctatum seed that I had in the refrigerator and I wasn't using, and so I sprinkled it up in here just to see if anything would grow. And sure enough, one, there's a second one in there, if it'll focus. Two, three, four. There's one down there by the looks of it. One over here. A Tempensis. And y'all know that Certipodium is my favorite genus of orchids. So who's to know? Maybe we'll see some of those grow. Maybe some will, maybe some won't. But that'll be interesting just to see in the future. So if you've got some seed pods that you want to see if they'll grow, maybe you want to try sprinkling them on your palm trees. Maybe you'll get something to grow, or your oaks or any other trees that look like it has, you know, a high chance of having a good basidio mycete type fungus or mycorrhizal fungus. Again, here are some baby Tempensis. I didn't put those there, those just showed up themselves. This here is the Tempensis that I put here. Undoubtedly the mother parent for those little guys growing behind the fern here. So, you know, nature is pretty cool, and sometimes some cool things will happen. But that's all I got for right now. Hope you all enjoyed the video. If you want to see more, hit like and share and subscribe, and leave a comment on what you want to see us do next. So that's all for today. We'll see you. Bye.